All right, welcome back to the Fat and the Devious podcast. So today's topic is going to be Bigfoot, and we have one particular case we're going to talk about today, and we'll get that to you in a second. It's just Will and I today. Nathan and Connor are busy right now. So, Will, what do you think about the state of the stock market right now?
It's bad.
Bad?
Actually, I guess technically it actually went up, didn't it?
Oh, yeah, true.
He announced a 90-day pause, so...
So could we sue the cabinet for insider investing at that point?
They're already being investigated for it.
Oh, well,
it's not like it's going to go anywhere.
At least we're doing something. The Trump investigation went nowhere. I mean, I guess it's woke to say that Russia likes Trump, but I mean, if you look at... So people say it's woke for to think that Donald Trump... that Russia likes Donald Trump, but then you have stuff like Storm 1516, which is a Russian propagandist group that created various false narratives, such as the fact that Kamala Harris ran someone over and Tim Walz sexual abuse allegations. And there are videos posted on places like TikTok which claim that, they're like victims of abuse by both. So, they're trying to run a...
Do they use AI or do they just do it themselves? Is it like a content farm?
They just have... It's just a content farm. So They have...
Just look it up on Google and see what comes up.
It just speaks volumes. I mean, why... They're obviously on Trump's side if they're going to such lengths to discredit Harris and Walz. And... I don't think I can make really any claims about Russian interference in the election because there's so many people are pointing fingers about what election is interfered with or not. So I guess it's beyond the point these days, but that proves in my mind. And
yeah, it looks like they've been taken down. I'm looking it up right now. And everything is just news stories and like government stuff.
And it was disinfo and
either kicked out or taken down.
Combine that with the narrative that Trump's secret Russian agent name is Agent Krasnov, although I should mention the guy who mentioned that is an ex-KGB agent, and I don't think the KGB is really a reliable source of information, but it is possible.
It is possible. He's also not in Russia right now. He was extradited to, I think, Norway or the United States, if I remember correctly. So he's not, like, under duress to say that, maybe. Well, maybe he is, I don't know.
It could be a shift in, because, for example, Trump, during his his confrontation with Zelensky, he was antagonizing Zelensky, almost blaming him for the war, but then later he told Putin that he threatened Putin about saying that he needed to accept the peace deal. So why would he be changing his stance from antagonizing Ukraine to suddenly saying that Russia needs to, be...
The whole, like, he is like a literal Russian agent, I don't think is true. I think he's more of a tool, if anything, for Russia.
Well, what I was getting at was I think that there may have been a recent shift in allegiance from Russia to his self-interest because he... Maybe the reason he's saying that Putin needs to, accept the peace deals is because he had a falling out with him, and now he's antagonizing him because they're no longer friends. And the whole Krasnov narrative was
smear.
Smear campaign by the KGB under Putin's regime. So this could indicate they had a falling out, which I don't know if that's better or worse for the country. I mean,
Trump is bad for the country in general. But it's a net negative.
I feel like Donald Trump going against Putin is even worse than him being...
It's a net negative whatever he does because he's bad for the country anyway.
True. Yeah, if he's bad for the country, it doesn't matter what he does, it's bad.
Oh, well, he's not doing tariffs and the stocks went back up. Yeah, he told all his rich friends to buy when the stocks were low. Yeah, it's literally insider trading.
I mean, he didn't do the tariffs. Okay, well, he could have just never done them in the first place. And I would like to say, I think pretty soon we're going to maybe cover the April 20th Insurrection Act supposed doomsday date, but but still.
Well, it's April 10th right now, so in 10 days we'll know for certain.
Yeah, but so if you don't see that come up in the next 10 days, then...
we're probably fine.
Yeah, or they were on.
Or alternatively, we're dead.
We're on the CIA hit list. So now that we have that out of the way, so the first thing I would like to mention was the various Bigfoot variations. So I have a list.
Yeah, we made a big list of theories, discussion, and proof in quotations for Bigfoot here. We got.
So we have
you go ahead.
Bigfoot variations, consistencies, spiritual connection, because there's a difference between the biological / evolutionary perspective and opposed to the spiritual connection. Then we have gigantopithecus, which, just to summarize, is just it's kind of like
the natural biologic aspect of him. It's not just his Bigfoot's relation to Gigantopithecus. It's what Bigfoot is naturally, if that is his origin at all.
Yeah, so the best comparison I can make is with the Loch Ness Monster. I mean, the Loch Ness Monster, some of the issues some of the surrounding topics around him are kind of fuzzy. I think, here's one note, there's an exorcist who went on the Lake Loch Ness and exorcised the Loch Ness Monster, and ever since that day there's been no credible sightings. So, hey, maybe it was a demon that was exorcised. So that's beyond the point. The point is that it was, people made parallels between the Loch Ness Monster and the plesiosaur to the point that to the point where everyone now assumes that Loch Ness Monster is a plesiosaur when that's still up in the air, especially with discrepancies in early.
It's incredibly unlikely. Just from me knowing stuff about plesiosaurs, there's not enough fish in that lake for one plesiosaur.
Not to mention early sightings of the Loch Ness Monster had inconsistencies, so it's hard to really pinpoint what we're just basically going with the narratives that align with the plesiosaur rather than incorporating all of them as a whole. In fact, there's people who theorize that the Loch Ness Monster lives outside of the lake and just lives inside the lake for feeding. So the narrative versus what these reports are actually saying are quite different, especially with and like I said, there's a spiritual connection that might actually be a demon, so that is another parallel with Bigfoot. So Gigantopithecus is to Bigfoot what the plesiosaur is to the Loch Ness Monster. And
those kind of relations are shaky at best. I'm hesitant to completely discredit them because
it's putting it in terms we can understand.
Yeah,
but
there have been examples of stuff like that actually turn out to lead to actually pretty major scientific discoveries,
like the gorilla, or can you out for a second? I'm gonna find it.
Specifically, I was thinking just now about like the coelacanth. People just dismiss it as like, oh, these African fishermen, they got no idea what they're talking about. Probably just a coincidence. And then they actually, dredge up one and they're like, oh, they weren't lying. Yeah, so the billy ape was another cryptid. And there's also, it's hard to draw the line on what isn't a cryptid. So, for example, there's a species of birds that I'm pretty sure returned from extinction. I mean, we don't ever talk about the success. We just talk about what's stuff up in the air. Like, there's plenty of, can you think of some organisms that were supposedly extinct and we realized that they actually weren't? Yes, actually, I can think of a couple. Hold on. I just mentioned the coelacanth. There's a couple of other ones.
All right, so you look that up, and I'll get back to what I was saying. So the Gigantopithecus is that's putting the terms we can understand, and and I want to create a contrast between the spiritual and we'll call this biological and spiritual connections. The spiritual connection, that would be people claiming that Bigfoot is psychic, can go through portals, maybe even ultra-terrestrial, which means an interdimensional being rather than, extraterrestrials from outside this planet, ultra-terrestrials outside this plane of existence. And, I will also say that a lot of areas with high paranormal activity, such as Skinwalker Ranch or Blind Frog Ranch.
Okay, so I've been looking some stuff up. There's actually some misinformation I'm seeing here. Most of these are correct. They're like the elephant shrew here, that was thought to have been extinct. The Chalkin peccary, which is like a very small pig, that was thought to be extinct, found again. Right here, this passenger pigeon, this is extinct. This is still extinct. We have not seen one for, 200, 250 years at this point? So Google is spreading a bit of misinformation here.
Yeah, so there's been ex-cryptids, and no one ever wants to make that connection because people want to assign cryptozoology as pseudoscience. But the thing about pseudoscience is that the only reason to pseudoscience is making scientific claims while not providing scientific data. But that doesn't mean it's inherently wrong. It just means you don't have the data to support it. I mean, there's plenty of ideas that we adopt that don't have any data. In fact, the whole extrovert and introvert thing, the guy who I think he faked his data in retrospect. So if you ever hear someone call themselves an introvert, maybe you can call them a pseudoscientist. I don't know. I think the whole thing is not really correct, but that's just an example. So, or superstition. There's plenty of people who have superstition and that kind of thing. And anything religious or mystical would also be, by definition, pseudoscientific. And there's plenty of scientists who are also religious, but they don't want to see that crossover because then it becomes pseudoscience. Pseudoscience is just an othering for fields that don't align with the narrative that academia is trying to put forward, and that's not bad because it makes sense because they want to be accepted by their peers and they want to say something that actually is based in data rather than just abstract ideas and just questionable data. But stuff like case studies are non-repeatable, and yet those are still put out there. And quantum physics doesn't really follow the scientific method. In fact, you can't even have data.
It's an entirely theoretical science.
Yeah, in fact, you can't even really have consistent data because quantum, like virtual particles, come in and out of the quantum field just randomly. So it's, if you ever hear, and what is it?
I wouldn't call it at least for quantum physics, I wouldn't call it pseudoscience because it's been proven to at least have tangible effects on things.
So what I was saying is with that quantum chip, it uses qubits, which are really hard to predict, and coding for a quantum chip is also really hard. It's like, because it uses, quantum science. It's basically just nonsense. So pseudoscience and science gets blurred once you really look at some of these things. And if you look at older ideas in the universe, like Taoism, if you look at, or Taoism, the best comparison I have is Star Wars with the Force, the living and cosmic force, which is basically one-to-one with the Tao or Tao. So Tao is the binding force of the universe, and it was considered like the flow of the universe. So going with the flow of the universe rather than against it. So you can think going with it, light side, and going against the dark side. So the Tao is unifying. But now that science is compartmentalized, it's hard to really illustrate the similarities and where it crosses over, rather than keeping it all separate. So where mysticism and science meet you can't really ever know because you can only measure science, and science is still a human construct, like a phylum, class, genome. That was created. The whole classification system was created by Aristotle, and we label a platypus as a mammal even though it lays eggs, and people say like, oh well, evolution must be fake because dogs aren't a separate species. That's only because we don't classify them as different species. They could be considered different species if we wanted to, but it's a human-made classification system. We can't. We draw the line in different places, and we choose not to. So
science is a set of rules that we use to explain things that occur in the universe. The things that occur in the universe don't need our approval to occur.
Yeah.
And any sort of argument that stems from that sort of, it contradicts this idea of science. If it happens, bees physically aren't supposed to fly, they do anyway.
Yeah. So, in 1984, O'Brien says that gravity is nonsense, and he says that he says if you see me float and I say I float, then I floated because everyone agrees. So, science is the same way. If we all just agree on how something works, and it does, then that's how it works. But if something goes against it, then it's hard to reconcile. And
it's like gravity. You're completely welcome to question it because we made up the term gravity. The force exists regardless of if you like it or not.
Yeah. The other side of the coin is science is still real, obviously. So I'm just saying that just because something works outside the bounds of science doesn't mean it's false. It just means there's no way to categorize it. So back what I was saying is we have Bigfoot variations. This is the first topic. So I'm only going to bring up the ones I can pronounce. So Box, Bella Kula Bigfoot, Bush Indians, Alaskan Athabascan Bigfoot, Chiitanka Sioux Indian Bigfoot, Harryman Yokutus Indian Bigfoot, Kahuyanje Maidu Indian Bigfoot, Larayan Dogrib Indian Bigfoot, Lofa Chickasaw Indian Bigfoot, Nayan Guchian Indian Bigfoot, Nakani Dene Indian Bigfoot, Oma Hoopa Indian Bigfoot, Champe Choctaw Indian Bigfoot, Ciatico Indian Bigfoot, Skookum, Chinook Indian Bigfoot, Stick Indians, Northwest Coast Bigfoot, the Woodsman, the Basking Indian Bigfoot, and I would like to add a few of my own. So there's the Almas, which are found in mainly like Slavic regions, I think also parts of Russia. There's also the Chinese wild man, and sorry, did I say? Okay, so the first one I meant to say was the Almas. The Almas are found in mainly Russia and Slavic areas, off the top of my head. And then there's the yowie, which is found in Australia. Chinese wild man is found in China. And then there's also variations. So there's East Coast and West Coast. The difference between so the higher and lower. So with megafauna is typically found on the top part of the continent. So larger animals are typically, correct me if I'm wrong, larger organisms are usually found Pacific Northwest and the top of the American continent, and then they get smaller as you go down.
Typically.
Okay, so
that's not true in across the board, but in terms of land living, large megafauna mammalian species, yes.
All right, so is this because there's a more sustainable diet in the Pacific Northwest in these related areas, or is this just because of some other factors?
Well, if we're talking about like mammoths and stuff, mammoths went all the way down to more or less Mexico and Costa Rica, but their variations differed wildly. There's the Colombian mammoth. There's like there's the like steppe mammoth. And the Colombian mammoth was the biggest. It was also probably the least hairy, if that makes sense. And it was like more like an elephant, if anything, a really big, long tusked elephant. So what I would say is that they're not exclusive to the Pacific Northwest, but given the lush nature of that area, it's probably more suitable for them now.
Well, based on the BFRO, their map states that there is Bigfoot sightings in every single state except Hawaii. Obviously, they can't exist in every single state, but there are some reported sightings in every single state. But here's another hole I would poke in the argument is... So megafauna obviously came across the Alaskan land bridge, and notable megafauna I could think of would be like South America with like giant land sloths and that kind of thing. But they also evolved to become smaller over time to get a more sustainable diet.
I wouldn't say that. The ground sloths and tree sloths are different thing. They're both sloths. They both are from the same family, but megafauna did not evolve into what we have today. That line went extinct. The line that led to elephants and tree sloths and whatnot were already in place and already evolving independent of these megafauna lines.
Okay, so you say they have mass extinction. So the gigantopithecus would that be an exception? Or, I mean, it is one of the only North American ape species that we can even like...
Gigantopithecus isn't North American. It is... Yeah, so generally it's Tibet, southern China, and Nepal. So, and again, that actually leads me into the Yeti. That puts it in direct, areas associated with the Yeti, and that's led to a lot of speculation. Oh, the Yeti is Gigantopithecus. And of course, people have extended that to Bigfoot, Yowie, and like you said, Alma and whatnot. Gigantopithecus, the last fossil we had was actually quite a long time ago. It wasn't an Ice Age animal. It was quite well before the Ice Age. 26 million years ago, if I remember correctly. It could be longer, it could be shorter. Correct me if anyone knows that. But
so 25 million years ago, does that cross over with early human species, or is it more convergent along just ape species?
That's like Sahelanthropus, Australopithecus. It's well before any of recognizable.
Well after a common ancestor at that point, right?
Yeah, Gigantopithecus was very much not our ancestor.
Okay, so let's get to start. So I have it on the list. Let's cover the exact specifics in a second. I want to add a few more, and that would be the wood booger. I know that's a weird name. I think that is in the south, and then the skunk ape. So what I was getting at earlier is that there's differences on different parts of the country. So the top part, Pacific Northwest, it's generally Bigfoot. Sasquatches are typically larger, and then down below in the south, they're typically smaller, in accordance to the size of mammal sizes. And then West Coast, they typically have dark eyes, and then East Coast, there are more sightings of them having glowing eyes. So there's the wood booger, and that's from, I think, Kentucky. And if you look into, and Kentucky is a bit odd. There's, it's a very rural place, and there's hollers, which are basically like kind of small valleys surrounded by
hilly
hills.
I wouldn't call them mountains.
You know, I wish there was a guy who wrote a book about this that we could put into political power.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, so the haulers are large and they have rural areas, so oftentimes communities are kind of cut off. So I think, and Southern superstition is it's a weird thing. Like, for example, like, what's it?
Lots of voodoo inspiration. And,
in New Orleans, yes, but
yeah,
so
so deep south, that would be voodoo.
And that's more black
Appalachia,
culture.
Kentucky, that's a different breed.
So Kentucky, I'm trying to think of a really weird Kentucky superstition. It's something like,
Not Kentucky here, but just Appalachia in general.
Yeah.
Mothman is one.
Mothman. I thought Mothman was more East Coast.
It's East Coast, like Appalachia.
Let's see, Silver Bridge. Where was Silver Bridge? Collapse.
Mason County, Virginia. There it was.
Virginia. Yeah, so that is East Coast. So the wood booger, and I'm saying that Kentucky is a highly superstitious area, so it's easy for tall tales to kind of spread in those areas. And there is also the skunk ape, which I don't even know if I want to even classify that as Sasquatch, but it's just kind of its own thing.
The whole skunk ape thing is just lots of variation in the stories there. The only real common denominator is just the stench.
And I think don't quote me on this, I think some of those classic photos were, there's some scrutiny on them claiming that they were actually pictures from like an amusement park, but I haven't verified that. So,
I haven't verified that either. I can't confirm that.
But photographic evidence isn't really as good as the testimonies people have shared about Bigfoot. A lot of the footage is, well, here's the thing. So one thing we need to get out of the way is people say like, oh, well, I'll believe Sasquatch the second there's footage that isn't shaky and blurry. Here's the thing. With the fight or flight, the infrasound, people are often in shock, so it's easy just to stare at it instead of grabbing a picture. It's usually gone in a second. You can see in the parasync footage, it's going very fast. It has like a good stride. If you watch the Memorial Day footage, he's literally running. And the fun fact, the Memorial footage, while it is possible for a human to run that speed, it was very rough terrain. There was rocks all over, so it would have been very hard for someone to run that fast in the footage. It's same with UFOs. So UFOs, the thing with the recently the New Jersey drones is those were actually real. Obviously, there's no question about it.
There were at the very, very bare minimum, there were very strange lights in the sky.
Yeah, Mick West claimed they were mass hysteria. I doubt that. Do you know who Mick West is?
No, but just to claim of mass hysteria, I doubt that very much.
Yeah, so Mick West is a UFO debunker, but here's the issue: a lot of these debunkers, they'll make claims about things they can positively debunk, but then they'll just be silent on ones they can't. So while I value his opinion, I don't use his de facto source, especially because he's a skeptic across the board, and he usually double dips in a lot of just cynicism and skepticism in general. So it's not really it's kind of a biased perspective, but he does make a lot of good points. So it's Bigfoot's moving very fast. You can't really see him very well. It's usually dark, and not to mention people give phone cameras too much credit. You can zoom. Usually, people can't really get very close to Sasquatch. Just pretty far away. There's also another theory.
My phone camera struggles indoors any more than 10, 12 feet.
Yeah, and here's the thing. This kind of crosses over with missing 411, which, to be clear, I don't think drawing parallels between Bigfoot and missing 411 is inherently correct. I think there's something to missing 411. I don't know if there's really a big conspiracy. I mean, people go missing in the woods all the time. It's just the absurdness of some of these cases. But I agree with the things that David Paulides is putting forward. I don't really agree with some of his assertions. He doesn't make very many, but you can kind of read between the lines on what he's trying to say. I disagree with some of those. But, they think there's some sort of kind of consciousness to the nature, and that kind of coincides with a lot of pagan religions, like Druids in a lot of tribal religions, and this crosses over with animism, where there's you assign consciousness to nature, and a lot of native cultures in America had this perspective. And I shouldn't put this across the board because obviously I'm not Native American.
Different culture, but
different cultures, different tribes.
In a very, very general sense.
They had more connection with the land because they didn't view it through perspective of ownership the same way that Europeans did, and the bourgeoisie as well. So, what was I saying? So, the land, it has a kind of consciousness, and they think this is responsible for taking children, or they think that there's feral people in, I think, Yosemite National Park, and they assign feral people. So
I'm not going to discount the feral people theory outright, because there have been, some variation of feralness in certain groups in the past. Like, if you've played Red Dead, the Murphy Brood and whatnot. That's based off a real life game. I forget what they're called, but that area around Pittsburgh in the 1899, early 1900s, there was more or less some sort of criminal group that operated, I put that in heavy quotations, out of the woods around Pittsburgh when it was early in its life. And they were more or less fairly feral. And I don't mean like they're on all fours, they're, cannibalizing each other, but they definitely could live off the land. And not in an agricultural farming way.
So I'll try and keep my further comments short, but what I was getting at was that I think Bigfoot has a spiritual connection with the land. Obviously, they are highly intelligent, probably on a scale, probably more so than most apes, like or dolphins. But it's hard to really compare consciousness with human consciousness because humans are the only frame of reference. And, for example, Koko or the John C. Lilly experiments with dolphins. Look into that one. That one's funny. They taught the dolphin language and they taught Koko language, but they were very limited in what they could speak because their consciousness was limited. So Sasquatch, it's hard to really assign how smart it is, or it is. But we can say it probably has a very spiritual connection to land itself, so which means that the land has a kind of an intelligence in association with Sasquatch. So saying back to the phone, why can't you just capture on a phone, that thing? It's unlikely you'd even be able to get close enough to Sasquatch because humans are very noisy in nature. They leave a lot of stuff, and people say, "Oh, why isn't Bigfoot on a trail cam?" Well, maybe he can sense the vibrations. Maybe he can tell that the land's been tampered with. I mean, if you come into your home, everyone has everything arranged in their house a very specific way. Let's say your microwave is on, a few inches off, or let's say that your toilet paper is gone or something, or everything smells weird. You can someone may have been here. So that's our house. I mean, if a Sasquatch, its home is nature, then maybe it would be able to distinguish different, especially because humans can distinguish what animals are around, like tracking, tracks, that kind of thing, scat. If a Sasquatch, that's their whole world, then obviously
humans are very recognizable. Even if I was just anything that lives longer than a mouse would probably, if it lives in an area with humans, it would probably get pretty familiar with what a human looks, sounds, smells like.
And what I'm getting at is I think a Sasquatch would be able to tell very quickly if there's a human in the area, even maybe miles away, either through some sort of extrasensory perception that gets the whole psychic thing that oftentimes people will hear voices from Sasquatch in their head, and this gets into the more religious aspect, which we'll get to in a second. And I think it's very possible that when there's movement, obviously Sasquatch is going to stay as far away from there as possible. That's why a lot of sightings are off the side of the road where, you're going too fast for it to really understand, and usually the shadows. So I think it's really implausible to be able to get a picture of Sasquatch close up because it's constantly moving. It's gone in an instant. Hard even to see it opposed to the foliage. And I know people make connections between Sasquatch and a bear, obviously, and there could be a lot of misidentification. Maybe sometimes people misidentify Sasquatch as a bear. I mean, there's been cases of Bigfoot running on all fours, so they just think it's a bear, for example, or vice versa. I'm trying to think if I forgot any more Bigfoot variations. I think I got the notable ones. So
just yowie, but that's
Yeah, that's for continent.
It's just Bigfoot down under. Like, it's not.
So, do you think there's any idea? You have any idea on how, assuming yowie and Bigfoot are both the same? So obviously, there's Yeti and gigantopithecus are connected, and that would explain why there's Bigfoot and Yeti on different
Tenuous
continents.
connection.
Yeah, but it's speculatory. How would a yowie get across the entire? Would it be convergent evolution at that point?
It'd have to be convergent evolution. It'd have to be like some crazy like island hopping, natural island hopping. You know, animals get blown away during storms, and they land on islands. And
Wait a minute. So instead of Sharknado,
I'm not kidding.
Bigfootnado.
I'm not kidding when I say that. Like,
Well, yeah.
that's how a lot of
Galapagos Islands.
Yeah, Galapagos Islands, Madagascar. That kind of stuff does happen.
Well, I'm just picturing Bigfoot getting swept up in like a hurricane and being flung across the earth.
It's Bigfoot. Well, the animals that do that are like tiny little lemurs and birds. Like, I can't imagine Bigfoot being like thrown around by much.
There's a phenomenon where rains fish and no one knows why. So maybe just rains Bigfoot and no one knows why. Or, here's a conspiracy. I just made it up on the spot. So I read on a crazy conspiracy site from the 90s that the Nephites from the Book of Mormon are actually the Nephilim because they're similar etymology. What I'm saying is the Nephites are the Yowie and like Yowie, Almas. When they went north, they went.
Okay, what are the Lamanites then?
The Nephites are the Nephites of the albino Bigfoot, but now I'm not sure.
So what are you going to tell the Native Americans? Did you guys know? Hey, Chief, did you guys know that your tribe, they're all Bigfoot? Sounds like a surefire way to get stuck full of arrows.
Yeah, Native Americans love it when you make claims about their faith. Hey, we're Jesuits, and so tell us about your beliefs. So we believe in a God in the sky, and we believe that there were limited humans that created the rest of the human population. Okay, God in the sky, that's God the Father, and then the founders of humanity, that's Adam and Eve. Boom. You already were Christian, you just didn't even know.
Actually, it's Professor Yakub. Try again. The truth is out there. You just have to look for it.
Yep. You have to read a conspiracy site from the 90s. Okay, so I want to go over a few consistencies now that we've gotten the convergent evolution out of the way and maybe possible connections. So I'll turn this over to you. So what are some consistencies you've noticed between sightings?
Well, depending on whatever variation of Sasquatch it is, there usually is some sort of trend. I mean, skunk ape, you have, just the stench, the like rotting smell, the kind of...
Yeah, the gamer smell.
The gamer gunk. And then in Sasquatch, you have like the kind of quick, like darting to and fro kind of movement. And then you go over to the Yeti, there's like not a whole lot of, physical sightings, given that, you're in the Himalayas. Yeah, camouflage, white fur. But there's lots of, trace. There's the scalp, apparently, in that one monastery that I feel like I have to bring up every time Yeti's mentioned, because, there's, the proof, the conclusive proof right there, but we can't ever touch it, so who knows?
Wait, really? I thought that was proven false, like it was...
it might have been, I don't know.
There was also another... I'll take over on it, but there's...
It's been a while.
There's another case. There was a Sasquatch-like carcass that was sold to a circus sideshow attraction, and...
It ended up being a bear, wasn't it?
Something like that. But it's just funny. Like, imagine they've been looking for evidence for years, and they just go to a circus, and they're just sitting there.
It's like the basking shark corpse thing. It's look at this sea monster we found. Clearly it's a basking shark.
The Montauk monster is real, at least.
Maybe, I don't know.
Well, I think we'll have to have Connor on that. Maybe we can get his friend who's an animal carcass expert to help us. So there was also a funny Russian news story about, it was like RT News, which was like pathological liars.
Okay.
And they claimed they had a Sasquatch, like a live Sasquatch. It was like really blurry footage of like the thing monkeys do where they beating against the cage. And it was just really funny. It was just so obviously fake. It's like the sun bear thing. Everyone thought it was a man in a suit, but it actually turned out to be a real sun bear because no one knows what sun bears look like. And So it's interesting you mentioned the Himalayas because Himalayas have their own kind of shared conspiracy. So first, this one's proven, but there's just carcasses just all along the Everest because no one can go up there and retrieve
corpses,
them. And have a fun fact, there's caves all over the Himalayas, which sometimes climbers will use as shortcuts, but they're highly dangerous. They can collapse literally any second. I mean, if anyone's ever watched Man vs. Wild, there's I think an Everest episode, and he goes through. Bear Grylls goes through one of the caves and states it's really dangerous because they can literally collapse literally any second. It's made out of ice and snow. And what are those like holes in ice that just go really far down? It's like made out of ice and it's just ice holes.
Ice hole? You mean ravines in glaciers?
Yeah.
Do you mean like literal like circular holes or ravines?
Yeah. Stuff like this. You see?
Oh, that?
Moulin?
Mountain? I have not seen this before. Maybe it's like meltwater.
Maybe like geothermal vents heat up parts of the earth and then it just melts around it.
Yeah, it could be.
Here, let's look at the diagram. So,
yeah.
Mountain, bedrock. Looks like tectonic borders, like a tectonic thing. So you can see bedrock. Yeah. And when bedrock breaks, darn, I can't think of I've forgotten all the geology terms. It's been a while, but what does this look like to you? So,
what, the bedrock?
Oh, there's a lake, and then there's a mountain below. It looks like the lake is kind of like funneling down.
Yeah.
Crevices, or that's a moulin right there. So I think we can we can conclude it's a moulin. They're moulins, and they just go straight down.
Yeah.
Try to traverse crevices. Here, let's just read this. Moulins are parts of internal structures of glaciers that carry meltwater from the surface down to wherever it may go. So it sounds like, okay, so water will melt, and it'll just go straight down.
Yeah.
This may not be what I'm looking for, but deep holes. I guess it is moulin. Okay, so moulins. So moulins are pretty scary. Blue holes are already pretty scary. Have you ever? There's a.
I know what a blue hole is. Yeah.
So I actually wrote about blue holes a little while for an essay. So there is one cryptid story where there's this friend group and they're all swimming in a blue hole, and then one just gets grabbed by something and just gets sucked down. They never see him again. And I'm pretty sure. Correct me if I'm wrong. Blue holes also are a form of kind of like cave formation almost.
They can lead to them, yeah.
So, and caves, so part of Missing 401 is caves. There's, and this gets into the Agartha thing I'm about to get to, which is interesting. So, blue holes lead down to caves, and there's this is back in like 2002, they found some interesting things at the bottom of a blue hole that had some archaeological remains. Is archaeology really the word for fossils? It's not really.
No, that would be paleontology.
Paleontology. Sorry, I got it mixed up. So paleontological remains. It was something of I think it was a tortoise of some sort, and then there was crocodiles that don't live there anymore, and it was a really good find. Paleontological find. And so mountains are similar, and they just go straight down. But the thing is, it's not like a blue hole where you can go swim back up. It's made out of straight ice. So if you get sucked down, you're just dead. Like that's why it's terrifying. It just goes straight down. There's no way you can get up. Even if you have like ice picks, ice climbing is
scaling like ice that's already been frozen over how many times? So it's super smooth. Yeah. No like grabbing edges.
And if it has a runoff water, then that means it's just like it's like when I feel like kind of melting ice is more slippery because it has a thin. So the reason ice is slippery is because it actually has a thin layer of water on the edge of it, which makes it slippery. And another fun fact: ice is obviously less dense than water, but most people know that. So. It has a thin layer of water on the end, especially if it's melting, and that just makes it really slippery. And you can't really grip ice. Maybe unless there's like snow on top to give you a grip, and then ice picks, it's kind of unreliable. So,
unless you have like a drill sort of ice pick, yeah, you can't really just.
But
you're gonna waste all your effort trying to get it in.
So stuff like moulins and obviously blue holes are unrelated to the Himalayas, and then the ice caves. It's where we get ideas. Like agartha. You did research on agartha. Do you want to give us the rundown?
I'm not just super familiar with it at this point, but agartha it's basically a hollow earth but it's a place of refuge for people rather than just like a geological phenomenon. And there's like a race of people who go there to like as sort of shelter from like the world, and they're like it's like a whole like semi-advanced civilization. It's basically under the earth Atlantis, Agartha at the very least, and there's a whole like thing about it. It gets pretty absurd after a certain point. It gets racist, I would say too, but yeah.
And in what areas does it cross over with like Ariosophy and that kind of thing?
All the images I've seen suggest that there's a thin band that runs across the Earth. So like kind of imagine
along the equator.
Kind of imagine like Earth, the globe has like a hangnail. You like pick it off and then you go like a zipper almost. And that under that is Agartha, and then there's like I don't know, half crescent, half circles on either side of the globe. Again, it's a very old thing, so like I don't know what the modern day interpretation.
It's almost like how there's like some maps, like old maps that had like ice walls on the edges, and then you can see like continents like, beyond the ice walls that obviously don't exist. And this reminds me of the weird medieval, well, not really cryptid, but reminds me of blemmys. Like you can probably see the picture, but it's basically these really weird creatures that supposedly existed with their face. They didn't have a head; they just had their face on their chest, and they just supposedly existed. Like you just see medieval zoological codices, and they would just be there. Like you just see like horse, cat, blemmy, human. It's just stupid because like they're just there as if they belong, but like there's no such thing as a blemmy unless it lived in Agartha, and so. To be clear, hollow Earth. The hollow Earth does not literally mean the core of the Earth is hollow. With the moon, you can make the case there's large caverns in the moon, but it doesn't make it hollow either. It just means it's like I don't know.
It doesn't make it hollow. The moon doesn't have tectonic activity anymore, so anything that was there, that's the cave is probably still there.
Yeah,
but it doesn't. But since there's no tectonic activity, there's no.
People forget how big the moon is. The moon is like half the size of America, like maybe the size of about Australia.
Yeah.
And so, people are like, oh, well, there's nothing there. Yeah, well, if you looked at every single inch of it, what if like there's like an alien probe like near the center of it? I don't know. Hypothetical. So Agartha, I think, so obviously the claims made about Agartha are obviously like really out there and really outdated, but the idea is that there's large caves with that sustain their own ecosystem underground. I think this makes somewhat sense because there's like tide pools sustain their own ecosystem. There are can you name some? Can you think of examples of organisms that are just cut off and then kind of go on their own path? I guess.
There are some. Hydrothermal vents are probably the biggest one. They don't rely on the sun or photosynthesis. They get everything they need from the vents themselves. But those are very, 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 very deep underwater. They're like tens of thousands of feet underwater in the ocean. Very, very extremely isolated. I can think of the like brine pools in Yellowstone, the acidic sort of pools with the like crazy colors, and there's extremophile bacteria in there, and that are very similar to some of what we think was the first life on Earth. And of course, there are some examples of that being in caves. There's an amphibian known as an olm, which is basically a legless, blind salamander, axolotl-looking thing. And it feeds off of, if I'm recalling this correctly, a sort of worm that only lives in that cave. The same with devil's hole pupfish, although devil's hole is kind of like a blue hole, and they mostly live near the surface, and it doesn't go that deep anyway. There's a very small sort of prey upon insect ecosystems in the entrance of caves around.
Do you want to join our podcast?
Yeah.
Come over here.
What are we doing?
All right. What do you know about Sasquatch?
Sasquatch? I don't really know much about him.
Okay. What about Hollow Earth?
Can't say I'm familiar with that either.
All right. How plausible is telekinesis.
That's moving stuff with your mind.
I think I'm down with that.
All right, cool. Thank you. All right. Now back to what we were saying. That'd be perfect.
Perfect. Keep that in the episode.
All right, so we have an outsider's opinion. He didn't really corroborate much of our evidence, but, research continues. So what was I saying? Something about, that's why I was going to...
You were asking me about self-sustaining ecosystems within caves.
Okay,
and there are a couple. They're not prominent. They're not in every single cave. But there are some examples of that.
Okay, so I was obviously trying to listen instead of yap. So I noticed a few things. So you said, so obviously to sustain an ecosystem, let's bring up photosynthesis. So photosynthesis, you have to have, so there's videos of people going up to people and saying, where does a tree get its mass? And it's like a stupid straw man because they say, oh, well, it gets it from the dirt. Oh, so trees are made out of dirt? And they're like, and it's just stupid because it's only part of the equation. So they get nutrients from the soil, they get water, and they also photosynthesize, which is converting like the sun's rays into sugar. So it's a combination of those things. Besides, just because I eat only hamburgers half the time doesn't mean I am a hamburger.
Yeah.
I mean, so photosynthesis, it needs energy from the sun, and then it converts the energy to grow. So you need energy put into an ecosystem to sustain it. So what is the minimum amount of energy you can put in to sustain an ecosystem?
Depends how big and how much living things are in the ecosystem. For example, the extremophile bacteria I mentioned in these acidic pools, they don't require very much because they're so extreme. They can't live anywhere else because they're so extreme. You only find them here. You only find them there in these pools. They still subsist off the heat and the minerals and the acidity and the alkalinity of the pool.
Acidity and alkalinity, how can you sustain yourself from that? So what about that would...
They can only live in stuff like that.
Only live in those conditions.
The alkalinity or the salinity or the acidity is what is helping them to sustain them.
Okay, so Connor is probably... It sounds like you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, you just need a constant
you need
stream of energy.
some state of energy, because remember...
But it has to be ongoing, like constant, right?
Right. Energy cannot be destroyed, and neither can matter. Unless
you're Jesus, then you can create tons of fish.
Unless you're Jesus for some reason. And
but
a random little bacteria is not Jesus. And so you need some form of energy that gives a surplus of energy supplying every living thing in that ecosystem. That's why things that rainforests and coral reefs, they have such high energy. There's lots of things living there.
That's where most oxygen comes from too.
There's lots of things living there. They live in places where there's lots of sunlight, lots of
plankton.
Yeah, exactly. And so in places like those, you have a very high energy threshold that needs to be maintained. And you see it with coral reefs. When the water starts to heat up, you get rid of some of the minerals that shell-building animals need, and you cause the coral to expel the algae that they use to, gather food with. And coral don't need the algae, but...
Coral feeds off of algae?
No, the algae have a symbiotic relationship.
Oh, how so?
It's a whole other thing. I'll try to be brief. Coral has little holes in their skeletons.
Trypophobia trigger warning. You can't say that.
Yeah, trypophobia trigger warning. Sorry. And algae lives in these holes, and them feeding helps sustain the coral. Whereas, because the coral we have today are a specific group of coral. They're not horn coral or crab coral from ancient times. Those are extinct. This is different coral than, say, 50 million years ago. And so these coral, they need a flowing current of water to supply them with the nutrients that they require. And
moving water, is that what you're saying?
Moving water. And
because they're stationary, they need water.
They're stationary, they can't move. Their polyps can move, but adult coral is not a polyp, it's a coral. And so the algae help sustain them to a point where they don't need to be in that sort of like water column. However, when the coral expels the algae from stuff like, say, warming temperatures, because the algae gets stressed and the coral gets stressed, it expels the algae dies, so it can't come back to the coral.
Mental health crisis, the algae mental health crisis.
Yeah.
Continue.
And so when I say stressed, I mean that in like a biological way. I don't mean not like hormones and whatnot.
Like environmental pressure.
It's under pressure and it's like trying to like help cope. The thing is, the temperatures stay high, so it kills the algae. The algae can't come back. The coral ends up, not being able to sustain itself without the algae because it's a symbiotic relationship, and ends up bleaching and dying, which is when people say like bleached coral reefs and it's just like ugly like rubble that's all white. That's
like in Minecraft.
Yeah, actually, that is what it is.
Because Mojang is into environmentalism now. Can't ride dolphins.
Apparently.
Even though you can crush turtle shells.
A game about blowing up people and burning down forests, and now we care about the environment.
Crushing turtle shells. Okay, so that might be... Obviously, we'll put it in very good terms, but I would like to add something. So, stress on algae, something that a good example would be jellyfish. They don't even have a brain, they just have a nervous system. Everything is impulsive. Like, for example, your spine... a lot of decisions you make aren't even made in your brain, it's made in the spine. When you touch a stove, for example, your spine makes a decision because it's the time it would take for your brain to react is too long. The spine needs to react. So, and people say you have free will. Oh yeah, well, are you really thinking with your spine? No. So, jellyfish just take this to an extreme. They just run off their nervous system, and then everything's impulsive. They're not really even conscious. Do we even consider them life at this point? I would say yes, but it's hard to even define. Fire.
We do because they fit the basic definitions of life.
But it's hard to define. Fire has similar characteristics. There's even, I don't know if you remember, this rings a bell. There's particles that interact in like space that share, like something like the quantum field that shares resources and something like that, and it's like very minimalistic view of life almost. Does that sound familiar?
Not quite. If you know what it is, you should show me because I'm not entirely sure.
Quantum life. Definition of life. Outliers.
What do you mean by outlier?
Well, so I'm saying it's hard to define. You can't really define life because when you see it, but there's certain things that go against the definition.
Requirements for something.
So while you're looking into that, I'm going to see if I can kind of tie this back into what we were saying. So we're saying there's a minimum amount of energy required to sustain an ecosystem, but we're trying to say what is that minimum threshold to sustain life.
The 7 common agreements for something to be considered to be alive needs to be movement, respiration, sensitivity, growth, reproduction. That's not true. I'm reading it now. It needs to be cellular organization, some form of reproduction, some form of metabolism, homeostasis, response to stimuli, growth and development, and adaptation through evolution. And that's why we consider things like bacteria to be alive, whereas a virus, we can't really say it's dead or alive, because a virus is organized, it can reproduce, it does not respond to stimuli, and it doesn't really adapt. It just sort of mutates and changes.
Fire meets some of the requirements. So
fire meets some of these requirements.
So does that make it partly alive?
It depends on how you view fire. If you're willing to view it as that sort of thing, the only thing really barring it from that is cellular organization, reproduction, and adaptation through evolution. Because fire it does respond to stimuli. It can grow, but it's not organized in a cellular way because it's just a form of destruction, essentially. And it can't reproduce. Like, fire can't make baby fire.
All right. Here, can you keep going on for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Figure this out.
So we consider pretty much everything above bacteria to be alive. In fact, virus and prions, they're kind of on the edge of being alive or dead because they fit a lot of key aspects, but they also act in ways that no other living thing acts like, kind of autonomously, like program or code. And so in that sort of context, jellyfish are alive. They're certainly not conscious or sentient, but they are nonetheless alive. Fungi is considered alive because it can reproduce, it responds to stimuli, it can evolve, it has some sort of metabolism and homeostasis. It's not just like, something that grows when something dies or there's a lot of water or something. Fungi appears because it's alive. It has a reason to appear. And obviously I can tell you why plants and animals are alive. You probably already know. And I can tell you why bacteria are alive. But prions, if you've heard of chronic wasting disease, you probably know what a prion is. Especially if you live here in Utah, you should know what chronic wasting disease is. And you may not need to be worried about it right now, but you should definitely know what it is. It's quite the thing, especially in deer. And so a prion is extraordinarily dangerous in the case it were to spread to humans, because a prion is essentially matter. It can't really be destroyed. You can wipe it down with all the Clorox you want and then burn the area around it. The prion's probably still there. And whereas a virus, you can sort of kill it, but you don't really make it decompose. You just kind of deactivate it, make it harmless.
So what may have been, what I was trying to think of, is a quantum exchange interaction. And from what I understand, it's how the exchange of energy between two quantum particles. I don't think this is what I was thinking of. It was more on like a molecular level rather than a quantum level. I'll have to think it over. But I heard you mention prions. Is that sort of like zombification?
It can be. It depends on what exactly we're talking about. So,
okay. So what comes to mind is Last of Us.
So
zombified ants.
That's a fungus, cordyceps. It's interesting, but it's not a prion. A prion is essentially a sort of corrupted protein. It's not corrupted in the sense that like
evil protein.
Evil protein. Proteins aren't alive, so I can't say that it's like that. But
instead of high protein diet, I have an evil protein diet.
So
go on.
What happens is that protein has to fold into a very specific shape in order to be a certain kind of protein.
Is this sort of like sickle cell anemia?
No, that's blood cells. So, and protein's different. Proteins they're very long molecules with lots and lots of like shapes and sizes. But when they
comes in powder.
Could
go on.
And when these proteins they kind of crumple in the wrong way, they become prions. And since we use proteins in DNA and our body kind of scans them as a sort of like instruction, if you will, when these proteins are misfolded, they can cause very, very terrible things to happen. Like in chronic wasting disease, you have things like deer literally like have their tongues fall out. They have like their eyes roll back into their head permanently. They have seizures. They just die on the spot. They
might install Genshin Impact.
Lord forbid. They die on the spot. They might have hair fall out. It just depends on what protein exactly is misfolded. We don't have very many examples of prions in humans. You'd have to actually have a misfolded protein that can somehow spread and replicate. So sort of think cancer, but instead of your own cells, it's protein.
So
you're looking at it right now.
Yeah.
So when it says protein folds into a certain way, and that dictates what kind of protein it is. And when it misfolds, and it's no longer a specific kind of protein, it becomes corrupted, essentially. It's carrying bad protein.
All right, so if I'm remembering correctly, amino acids are part of proteins. Proteins are part of genes?
Amino acids and fats form into proteins.
What do proteins form into?
It depends how it folds and how long and how big it is.
So is protein the thing folding the DNA, or is protein the DNA
No,
itself?
Protein is part of the DNA, and the amino acids are part of that protein.
And then what's the thing that folds them?
What's the thing that folds them? Well, the protein just naturally folds because it's so big and long. It's just natural in it. So the sort of hexagonal shape that you see in like
it's not just a diagram to make it look.
It's a it's like a heart X-ray.
It's like when you
it's a diagram. It's color coded to help you understand it. It doesn't actually look like that.
when you see a image of like an anatomy diagram, it looks like the human body is like a rainbow. I mean,
a giant spaghetti ball. That's a protein.
And
then shrink it down to a microscopic size.
But I mean, if you were to have them open, like if you're a sicko or something, you would quickly learn people are not a rainbow. They're red.
No, they're red and pink and brown and gross and smelly.
Yeah, and don't cut people open.
With the context of chronic wasting disease, proteins deer use are not entirely specific to deer, but the one that causes chronic wasting disease is exclusive to deer. Same with cordyceps.
Yeah, all organisms on Earth share. Well, it depends on the organism, but like 99% of the same DNA. I mean, humans share.
We need to have a misformed protein that is not only in part of the DNA that we share with deer, but it needs to be an active part of the DNA that we share with deer. So, formation of the heart lining, we need a prion that's misfolded for that. And it makes our heart explode.
All right, here. Okay.
I'm spitballing here. I have no idea if that actually exists, and I hope to God it doesn't.
It's like what was it? The remake of The Grinch. Like how they make horror movies out of intellect, like free public domain.
Yeah.
There's the horror movie version of The Grinch. His heart just explodes. So the way that AIDS got to humans, so most people think that a guy
had sex with a monkey. No.
I want to believe that, but
it to be funny.
But it wasn't true.
Very loud way to say that. But, no, you can get AIDS from ingesting blood. You can get it from exchanging saliva. You can get it through having sex. That's one method of transmission. But why don't we reuse needles? Because we can get it from blood to blood.
And that's why there's so much disease among like drug communities, is because they're using the same one.
And needles, they're just exchanging bodily fluids.
Normally, I don't want to stereotype, but for people who are using lots of drugs, I think it's a good exception. People who are likely to use drugs are also probably not practicing safe sex.
If you are hooked on heroin,
you're probably going to be
very well. If you're hooked on heroin, you're obviously not being careful. So I take that back. People hooked on heroin have a very high likelihood of, the longer they go on, of contracting AIDS and HIV.
Yeah, so Nathan, you're here. I thought that was a weird notification sound. Okay, so what I was saying is, so with the evil proteins, what was the name again?
Prions.
Okay, so if I ate a deer with prion, what's the disease called?
Chronic wasting disease.
Chronic wasting disease. If I ate a deer with chronic wasting disease, do you think it could transmit? Hypothetically.
It's a bacteria, you said?
No, it's a prion. It's a misfolded protein.
Oh, definitely then. Unless if it's like specifically like.
If it's what I was telling
really
Ethan
large.
Is that if it was specific to deer, no, it couldn't. You couldn't get it. But prions can't be destroyed, so it would remain in your system. So.
Well, there's plenty of functions of your system that are shared with deer. There's plenty of DNA in your system that's shared with deer. Like, if you inject some of the same proteins into rats as you do into humans, you're going to get the same result regardless.
Could China make it cross the species barrier?
Well, not China. Anyone could.
Like if I was just bored one afternoon?
Bored one afternoon? No. I mean, a protein has like a small chance of misfolding. The moment it misfolds, it can't self-correct. It can't go back to being the other protein. It's that corrupted protein. Well, sure it can. It needs to heat up and whatnot. But let's say just like a prion from my saliva, I spit and I leave it on the ground. I'm already infected with that prion, and I'll see whatever effect. But that prion is now in my saliva. My saliva will decompose. That prion will not.
So is it kind of like a tardigrade and it's just really resilient?
Yeah, protein in general is really resilient.
Is prion, is it kind of, so a virus is not an actual organism. A virus just is similar to an organism. Is a prion an organism, or is it just similar? Like rust. Rust is not an
Do you
organism.
consider nutrients to be alive?
No. Well,
Then no.
I've also never heard of a prion, but rust. People think rust is like bacteria. No, rust is just. What is rust? It's just
Iron
like
oxide.
iron oxide. That's not.
Oxidized iron.
Yeah. So. A rust, these things are similar to an organism, but they're not an organism. Is that why you brought up a prion as an example? So it's almost
I brought up a prion as an example because it's like a virus in that it fits some of the examples for something to be alive, but it doesn't fit all of them. It doesn't fit some of the most important ones.
So Nathan, I was going to say, we were talking about things that barely meet the marker for life or only meet a few of the qualifications, and I was remembering something. It involved a simulation run of these particles, and the particles in the simulation interacted in a way that could be considered life, but it didn't meet all the markers. But the way these molecules interacted was they shared resources and that kind of thing, and it seemed almost like life, and it shows how not everything is something might meet some of the markers for life, but not be entirely life. Does that sound familiar?
Yes, but in the case of a prion, I don't know how that even remotely compares. The smallest, I guess it's kind of like a debate as to whether or not viruses. Actually, I'm not entirely sure. I don't know very much about viruses. But
They're generally considered not alive, if you want the general consensus.
Yeah. I only asked because it was on the tip of my tongue. I can't remember what it was, but maybe I've given enough details someone can remember. So what were you saying, Nathan? I don't want to cut you off.
Sorry. I was just going to say, in the context of, a prion or a virus, those are literally just free-floating and executing functions. It's like a string of code that if it happens to bump into you, and the more of it is, the higher chance that it will bump into you. But if it bumps into you, it'll execute this string of code in your bacteria, for example.
That's one of the ways bacteria can evolve so fast. Is just basically they just wander around and they sort of ingest this code. Usually, just kills them. Occasionally, it will actually make a function.
In the case of plants, there's a cell wall, and then what's the equivalent for animal cells?
They don't have
They don't have one, but they
have a cell membrane.
Yeah, the cell membrane. The membrane only lets in certain things in. So, what are the kind of defenses against something like a prion that the body has?
Well, the same.
The defenses against the prion,
immune system.
First off, the membrane itself,
a protein.
I'm certain there would be certain
So that's like the firewall.
Certain proteins that cannot pass a membrane, for example.
Your average protein can't get into a cell membrane because there's nothing big enough to allow it.
What makes a difference for some of them?
Well, just size, charge, various things.
Just
you
special.
The nature of the prion matters too.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, so obviously most aren't going to be able to get in, but then there's always one kind that can. That's what makes a difference.
Yeah, and just since deer, the chronic wasting disease is from a prion, and so what happens with the deer is that these prions they kind of become inactive. They're not destroyed though, and so let's say,
but they're not life, so they can't be dormant.
They
don't need energy. They're just.
Is it dead or is it dormant?
You said it's like a nutrient. It doesn't need, going back to the minimum threshold of energy to sustain life, it doesn't need that energy to sustain it because it's not life, so it can just stay dormant.
If you want to refold it, a prion, then yeah, it does need energy because you need to heat up protein to make it.
It's made from protein, and protein is made from amino acids, so it has some of the requirements for life, but it's not fully, like a protein of in itself isn't life, right?
It reacts to stimuli. That's one of the conditions for life. But I guess it reproduces.
Nathan's calling you.
What?
I have to ask. Remind me, what is a general cause of death from a prion? Is it just buildup of the prions and them not getting degraded?
Symptoms vary.
Yeah, symptoms vary. It depends on where the prion kind of makes its thing. you and we all may have a prion somewhere that just kind of nestled in our genome, but the thing is that that section of the genome is inactive. We don't use it where it's not active. We don't use it for anything. So right now we don't even know it's there because it's not manifesting at all. But however, think cancer. One specific aspect of the gene is flawed. There's a guanine where thymine should be, and what happens is that one malformed cell keeps reproducing. It's kind of the same thing with a protein, except much bigger than just, one single cell causing a tumor. It doesn't cause a tumor. It causes the things that the proteins are used to build. So, like I said, the lining of a heart, and it causes that to go nuts. So
it's misfolding. So what would be on the border of a heart? So would it be like, is it
it'd
like
be muscles and
muscles?
lining,
So it's causing that lining. Yeah. It's misfolding it, and then it's making it have spontaneous growth.
So like if I get a cut right here, and one of the proteins for healing that cut is misformed, it doesn't ever heal. Instead, it like inversely heals. So I end up getting an infection from that, and I end up having to amputate my arm. That's one example. Again, the actual result of a prion varies wildly. It just depends on what prion you got.
And how would... Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, the way I understand it, Will, is that the prions don't actively self-replicate. It's that they promote replication. Is that
right?
correct?
Well, you said it's code. Code of in itself is not a program.
I compared it to cancer because cancer self-replicates. Cancerous cells self-replicate. It doesn't stop replicating. That's what cancer is. A prion does not replicate itself. It just causes every other protein that it has replaced to fold like that prion.
So go ahead, Nathan.
Sorry, you're going to say?
Nothing.
The example that I'm thinking of...
No, I haven't. I only brought up chronic wasting disease because it's pretty much the only prion disease I'm actually familiar with.
Yeah, I was researching something and I said, we'll just bring up something, and then now here we are. Do we have anything else to say about prions?
Okay.
Whatever Nathan has.
Well, I was gonna ask. So there's an operon in the cell, for example, that it's called like the lac operon that's used for like degrading lactose, like pretty simple stuff. But like my question is it basically like a similar thing where the transcription factor that is inhibiting the production of a prion, is it just that transcription factor is turned off by the prion itself?
Just to interject here. So transcription factor, just based on what you're hearing, I'm assuming it's copying genes from a template, from the genome or the chromosomes over and actually executing it, like executing a function. Is that correct?
Transcription factors are just like basic things that affect like gene transcription. So like an inhibitor, for example.
Like what is gene transcription? That's my question.
Gene transcription is how a cell reads your genome, and then it uses whatever proteins that genome has dictated, amino acids in this case, to form a protein, and that protein forms a specific function, and then blah, 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 enzymes meet with the protein, blah, blah, blah. Something happens.
So is it kind of like the genome communicating with the protein, which
causes something to happen? It could be, I don't know, building like after a workout, it can be building pumping muscle. Blood. It could be pumping blood, or it could be healing a wound. It could be all manner of things. It can be building or tearing down.
Yeah, my biology knowledge.
So to answer Nathan's question, it depends entirely on what prion you got. If a prion is just wandering around in a cell and it gets picked up by one of these protein chains, that prion goes to wherever the protein chain is going, and it's a roll of a dice to dictate whether or not it actually causes harm. In chronic wasting disease, that often manifests as, just these absurd and like crazy behaviors by deer, just like rolling their tongue out, almost making it fall off, rolling their eyes so far back into their head, they like go pretty much into their skull. It just depends on what protein you got and where the protein goes.
Yeah, it just makes the deers go freaky, So one parallel I can think of is bath salts. Have you seen videos of people on like hardcore drugs just going crazy? Like that seems almost like kind of like prions.
Sort of. It's not the same.
Not the same. It's not doing protein folding, but it is messing with their brain in a similar, like, insane level. It's just a parallel. It's not the same, but there could be parallels.
It's parallel. It's biologically different process.
Yeah. So there's multiple ways to lose your mind.
I'm putting this in while editing, and I noticed that the recording we made is really long. It's about 2 hours and 20 minutes in full. I'm going to cut it into two parts, and this is a good part just to cut it off. So this will be the end of the first part, and then either next week or later this week, the second part will come out, and it'll just